A heavy rocket barrage from Lebanon causes a direct hit in Safed. U.S. President Joe Biden and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speak for the first time in months. And the UN Security Council holds a briefing session focusing on the humanitarian situation in the Middle East.
Members of the Council have before them documents.
You're now watching Q News. I am Karim Hatem, and we start this bulletin with the latest developments in Lebanon.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين.
وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
A heavy rocket barrage from Lebanon has reportedly caused a direct hit on a home in Safed. The Israeli police stated that its officers are responding to reports of several impact sites in Safed with no reports of any injuries so far. Rockets sounded around many towns about 20 minutes ago, and heavy booms were heard, with a number of interceptions seen in the skies over the northern city. An Israeli hospital says patients were admitted to the hospital after missiles struck Highway 22 outside Haifa. The hospital said that the injured were taken to its emergency room for treatment, but did not say what condition they were in. It was unclear if the missile hitting Highway 22 was direct hit or a falling rocket following an interception by the Israeli air defenses. Israeli ambulance service has announced that 2 were killed and others injured in Kiryat Shmona due to rockets fired from southern Lebanon. The Israeli occupation forces confirmed in a statement that 20 rockets were detected being launched from southern Lebanon towards Kiryat Shmona in northern Israel. These rockets resulted in fires in several buildings within the settlement. Israeli media indicated that the Iron Dome defense system was disabled during the attack. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned the Lebanese people that they risk falling into the abyss of a long war. Israel has expanded its ground offensive against Hezbollah by sending thousands more troops into a new zone in southwest Lebanon. Netanyahu also said that Israel forces had taken out the would-be successors of Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah without naming them during his televised address.
Iranian military base. Just one day after the October 7th.
U.S. President Joe Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have held a phone call as Israel expands its ground incursion into Lebanon and considers how to respond to Iran's recent ballistic missile attack. This call is the first between Biden and Netanyahu since August 21. Last week, Biden said that he would not support a retaliatory Israeli strike on sites related to Tehran's nuclear program. Tensions between Hezbollah and Israel escalated following clashes in southern Lebanon as the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warns Lebanese and puts conditions for Defense Minister's visit to Washington.
Amidst Israel's ground incursion in Lebanon and continued offensive in Gaza Strip, sirens sounded last night at Haifa, Accra, and the Western Galilee. Hezbollah reported a clash with Israeli occupation forces attempting to infiltrate towns in southern Lebanon. In response, Hezbollah used artillery shells and rockets, inflicting casualties on the Israeli occupation forces, which led to their retreat. These reciprocal attacks follow Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's warning to the Lebanese people, stating that Lebanon would face severe destruction and suffering similar to that of the Palestinians in Gaza if Hezbollah continues to operate there. Meanwhile, the Gaza Strip saw further Israeli attacks, with local media reporting that an Israeli airstrike on the Nusayrat camp in central Gaza killed at least 3 Palestinians and injured many others. In parallel, Netanyahu postponed Defense Minister Yoav Gallant's scheduled visit to Washington until after a delayed phone conversation with the US President Joe Biden. The conversation is crucial, as Netanyahu also seeks approval from the Israeli Security Cabinet for a military response to last week's missile attack by Iran. However, this escalation has not yet received backing from the US, signaling potential friction between Israeli and American strategies in the ongoing conflict.
For more analysis, we go to our newsroom with Hani Saif. Over to you, Hani.
Thank you, Kareem. And for further analysis on the current escalating tensions in the Middle East and how the United States view the situation in light of the latest phone call between Joe Biden and Netanyahu, we're joined by the foreign policy analyst, Marco Mossad. Welcome to Qnews, Mr. Mossad. Now, first off, what outcomes could we expect from Joe Biden's and Netanyahu's call?
Annie, thank you for having me. I think this call between the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and the US President comes like 1 week after the Iranian attack or the Iranian retaliation against Israel, after Iran also launched 180 or between 180 to 200 ballistic missiles into Israel, and most of those were intercepted by the assistance, of course, of the US. And I believe two military bases in Israel reported minor damages. That's why Israel found itself in a position to retaliate. Why? Because Israel, or the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, wants to redefine the balance of power in the Middle East, and also wants to capitalize on the perceived weakness of the Biden administration right now, putting the pressure on Israel or the Prime Minister to just retaliate, and also to confront the new U.S. administration and Iran in its proxies with the de facto situation, putting pressure on all of these actors right now to listen to what Benjamin Netanyahu wants to do. And also this call right now, as you mentioned in the report, that comes like the first one in almost 2 months of a situation of the growing tension and also obvious discontent between the two leaders, largely due to the Prime Minister's stance on refusal of the repeated calls of the U.S. to ceasefire, so giving the impression that Israel is acting beyond the U.S. control right now. That's why we see all of these reports, according to the U.S. intelligence officials, saying that Israel or the U.S. has limited influence or limited power over Israel. These reports want to tell us one more message, that if Israel wants or hits a larger target, then there's no embarrassment on the shoulder of the U.S. and there's no also moral political consequences if Benjamin Netanyahu to do so. So we see now that the weakness of the Biden administration cannot contain the stubbornness of the Benjamin Netanyahu. That's why we're seeing this call. It's very important to give the green light. I mean, from the Israelis' perspective, it's important to give them the green light. I think they come up with the plan to hit particular targets in Iran, and they are trying to share it with the U.S. officials and the U.S. president. And of course, from its side, Biden wants to try to put limitation or put more pressure over Israel, not to escalate the situation into a wider war or in the Middle East.
Well, Mr. Mossad, do you see a contradiction between the United States advocating for a ceasefire while approving arms deals to Israel, such as the recent fighter jet agreements? What should we read within these contradictions?
I don't see it as a contradiction because the U.S. was very clear from the beginning to protect the Israel's national interest or the national security. So the U.S. either like the Democrat or the Republican administration are on the same page to protect Israel, and that's why they are sending the unlimited assistance or sending the American weapons unlimited to the Israelis since October 7th last year. So this is from one side. The other side is the United States really wants to have a ceasefire, wants to limit the escalation now in the Middle East because we are approaching a very tight race between the Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And I don't think this is the last thing that Kamala Harris wants to see right now, to have a new confrontation between Iran and Israel. And of course, if this happens, the U.S. will be involved literally. So I don't think Kamala Harris wants to see that. That's why we're seeing this soft message on the Prime Minister to have a ceasefire without having real effective sanctions or limitations.
Well then, sir, how do you assess the Biden administration's approach to balancing its defense commitments to Israel with the mounting pressure from parts of the international community and the domestic groups to push harder for peace?
Yeah, the Biden administration right now learned the message very hard that the cost of their support to Israel is overdue right now, and it's higher than the success that Israel or that Israel and the U.S. have achieved either in the ground or in the political arena. So I don't think the Biden administration really wants to provide more support to Israel. However, he has to provide that because, as you can see that from the recent book from the journalist Woodward, that he emphasized that Biden was very angry and he was using very bad words describing Benjamin Netanyahu because he was very stubborn and he acted like he is acting out of control of the U.S. and he acting beyond the U.S. Control. That's why we're seeing right now the Biden has to provide or keep providing the U.S. assistance. However, he does not have the effective tool to guide or to redirect Benjamin Netanyahu on this wider war. From his side, Benjamin Netanyahu wants, of course, to weaken the capabilities of Hezbollah and all of the Iranian proxies. However, on the long term, on his plan B or I feel like his one of the key objectives in escalating situation right now before the U.S. election is to redefine the balance of power in the Middle East, making it like a de facto in front of the new administration and also in front of the Iran and its proxies, to not to draw the red line or not to go up beyond the red line of Israel. And of course, he is doing this every day, and for him, every day, this is very important to achieve this goal because he knows.
Well, then, speaking of Iran, will the Biden administration pressure Israel to retaliate to Iran's attack or not?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question.
Well, speaking of Iran now, do you think the Biden administration will pressure Israel to retaliate for an attack against Iran or not at all?
So from his side, the U.S. also has very strategic plans of what's going on right now in the Middle East. How? Because the Middle East, the U.S. is also happy with what's going on against the Hezbollah, against weakening its proxies. However, the U.S. also wants to limit this escalation or limit this confrontation right now between Iran and Israel. But I feel like the U.S. also was very angry and was very impressed about what's going on in the Middle East when Iran launched 180 or between 180 to 200 rockets into Israel. This is a hard message that Israel and the U.S. does not want to have, because also Israel also want to restore its deterrence capabilities against Iran, and of course the U.S. approves that. So I feel like the Iranian retaliation or the Iranian rockets last week delivered the message that Iran will not retaliate or will not stand with what was going on the Hezbollah and the Middle East. That's why the U.S. is like part of it, or what part of the administration wants to put pressure in Iran not to escalate or not to deliver a very hard message against Israel, because what happened last week, it was like a very effective message from Iran. That was the double number that they launched last April on the ballistic missiles against Israel. And I think that the fact that 2 military bases were reported damages or minor damages, this is like a very effective political message that, that Israel will not tolerate this in this moment.
Ladies and gentlemen, That was Mr. Marco Mossad, the non-resident scholar at the Middle East Policy Council. Thank you very much, sir, for your insight. And Kareem, back to you.
Thank you very much, Hani. Rockets were seen on the Israel-Lebanon border. Hezbollah claimed its fighters had pushed back advancing Israeli troops in clashes along the length of the border. Meanwhile, sirens have reportedly sounded across northern Israel. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has made a strong appeal for an immediate ceasefire both in Gaza and Lebanon. Speaking at a press conference, the UN chief said that the Middle East is a powder keg with many parties holding the match and that attacks in Lebanon are threatening the entire region. Noting the worsening situation, the UN chief called for an immediate ceasefire and irreversible action for a two-state solution. Guterres also said that draft Israeli legislation that would stop the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency working in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank would be a catastrophe if enacted.
That could prevent UNRWA from continuing its essential work in the occupied Palestinian territory. Such a measure would suffocate efforts to ease human suffering and tensions in Gaza and indeed the entire occupied Palestine.
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has met and held talks with his Saudi counterpart Prince Faisal bin Farhan. The meeting included discussing regional issues and developments in the region, including in Lebanon and Gaza, and the crimes committed by the Israeli occupation forces. The meeting included coordination with regional countries in order to stop genocide and aggression of the Israeli forces. And now with the latest in Gaza. A meeting between Palestinian factions Hamas and Fatah has begun in the Egyptian capital, Cairo. Hamas, led by the deputy chairman of its political bureau, Khalil Hayya, and Fatah, led by its deputy head, Mahmoud al-Alul, are meeting to organize Palestine's internal affairs. The meeting also aims to discuss managing border crossings and addressing health, relief, shelter, social development, and educational issues. Egypt's ongoing communications with various parties, especially Israel and the United States and Hamas, aim to maintain negotiations, prevent escalation, and achieve a ceasefire. Six Israelis have been injured in a stabbing attack in the occupied city of Al-Khadira. Israeli media declared that some of the injured are in critical condition and that the assailant was neutralized. The nature of the assailant's motive is still unknown. The UN Security Council will hold a briefing session followed by close consultations focusing on the humanitarian situation in Gaza, the Palestinian question, and the broader regional situation. Algeria and Slovenia, with support from France, requested the meeting. Members are expected to hear two briefings. The first from the head of the finance section of the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and the second from the Commissioner General of the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees. Now let's take a look more into the African news with Salma Marwan in our newsroom. Over to you, Salma.
Thank you, Karim. And now we move to the latest developments in Africa. The Permanent Committee for Following Up Egyptian-African Relations has held its regular meeting headed by Egyptian Ambassador Abu Bakr Hifni Mahmoud, the Deputy Foreign Minister, with the participation of representatives of ministries, agencies and national bodies. The meeting discussed ways to enhance bilateral relations with Congo and Kenya, reflecting the keenness of the Egyptian political leadership to achieve mutually beneficial outcomes with its African partners. Kenya's central bank governor Kamau Thuge says that his country expects more money from the International Monetary Fund by the end of the year. Thuge also stated that the nation is in talks with the fund about combining the 7th and 8th reviews of its support program. Thuge said they are in the final stages of an agreement with the IMF, with the fiscal framework already agreed. U.S. President Joe Biden has announced the postponement of his trip to Angola. This is due to Hurricane Milton approaching the state of Florida. President Biden has decided to delay the visit in order to oversee preparations and responses to the hurricane.
It's Florida in over a century, and God willing it won't be, but that's what it's looking like right now. Immediately approved the pre-landfall.
Severe flooding in Niger since June has claimed 339 lives and displaced over 1.1 million people, devastating critical resources, schools, and cultural sites across the country. Torrential rains have caused widespread destruction, including the loss of livestock and damage to infrastructure, forcing the government to postpone the school year. The floods, which have affected various regions, including the capital, underscored the increasing threat of extreme weather linked to climate change. And now we're going to move back to Karim for more news.
Thank you very much, Salma, for this dive into Africa news. Now we take a look at updates of the global economy. Global shares showed mixed performance on Wednesday, with U.S. stocks holding relatively firm following scary swerves in the Chinese markets. Europe's Stoxx 600 index closed 0.66% higher. Germany's DAX rose 0.99%, while the UK's FTSE 100 and France's CAC 40 added 0.65% and 0.52% respectively. In Asia, stocks in Shanghai tumbled 6.6% for their worst loss since February 2020. In Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Index fell 1.4% after dropping more than 9% the day before, which was its worst loss since the global financial crisis of 2008. In the US, the S&P 500 was up 0.7% in the afternoon trading and on track to top its all-time high set last week. and the Dow Jones Industrial Average was up 0.9% as of 3:57 p.m. GMT, and the Nasdaq was 0.6% higher. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here's what we have been covering. A heavy rocket barrage from Lebanon causes a direct hit in Safed. US President Joe Biden and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speak for the first time in months. And the UN Security Council holds a briefing session followed by closed consultations focusing on the humanitarian situation in the Middle East. And this concludes our news bulletin for the hour. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at Qnews EGY to stay informed. For real-time updates, connect with us on the UMS digital platform. Watch it. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more updates on Q News.